I held the pen, its tip resting against the cold paper. 12 years of marriage were about to be reduced to a single signature. I was certain my husband was a heartless coward who abandoned me in my darkest hour. But then, hidden in a dimly lit Chicago lounge, I overheard his secret boy talk. What I heard did not just tear up my divorce papers, it exposed the most ruthless, cold-blooded sacrifice a man could make. Hello to the amazing audience of Zoe Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget. So if you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1, so our hardworking team can cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment below. My name is Sadie Spencer. I am 38 years old, and I was sitting completely alone in my sleek, glass-walled office at Cobalt Horizon Tech in the dead center of downtown Chicago. Before me, resting on the polished mahogany desk, was a divorce settlement. It was 18 pages long, 18 pages to dismantle 12 years of shared history, laughter, and what I once foolishly believed was unconditional love. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sterile, hollow hum, perfectly matching the absolute emptiness inside my chest. I stared at the thick stack of paper and let my mind drag me back through the grueling nightmare of the past 2 years. 2 years ago, my entire world shattered. I had been ruthlessly framed and then humiliatingly ousted from the tech firm I helped build from the ground up. The architect of my destruction was none other than Julian Vance, my former mentor. Julian was a ruthless, terrifyingly powerful tycoon who viewed people as stepping stones or obstacles. I was an obstacle, so he crushed me, taking my professional reputation and my life's work down with him. When you lose everything, you expect your partner to be your sanctuary. You expect the man you married to stand in front of you, shield you from the shrapnel, and help you rebuild. But my husband, Marcus Spencer, who had just turned 40, offered me absolutely nothing, no warmth, no rage on my behalf. Instead, he met my devastation with an icy, terrifying indifference. As I spiraled into deep depression, Marcus simply checked out of our marriage. He started leaving the house before the sun came up and returning long after midnight. I noticed money moving around, accounts becoming suddenly restricted, and his finances cloaked in a new layer of intense secrecy. Worse, he started spending his nights out, constantly partying and clubbing with his tight-knit circle of friends, leaving me alone with my ruin. A suffocating, dead silence had swallowed our lavish penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. We were no longer husband and wife. We were two well-dressed ghosts haunting the same expensive hallway. We shared the same breathing space, politely stepping around each other in the kitchen. But we never once touched the agonizing pain festering between us. He never asked how I was doing. I stopped asking where he had been. By tonight, my exhaustion had finally scraped rock bottom. The fatigue was no longer just mental. It was a physical weight crushing my bones. I had convinced myself that Marcus looked at me and saw only failure. He despised the defeated woman I had become. In the lonely hours of the morning, I tortured myself with the certainty that there was another woman, a younger, successful woman who did not carry the heavy baggage of a ruined career and a broken spirit. Why else would a man disappear into the city every single night? Suddenly, the sharp buzz of my phone shattered the quiet of my office. It was a text message from Marcus. It was brief, devoid of any affection or even basic courtesy. Drinking with the guys over in the West Loop. Will not be home for dinner. That was it. That was the final drop of poison I needed to kill the last lingering bit of hope in my heart. The coldness of his text crystallized my resolve. I reached out, my hands remarkably steady, and grabbed the 18 pages of the divorce settlement. I shoved the thick envelope into my leather designer handbag and pulled out my phone to request an Uber. I was done waiting. I was done being the pathetic, weeping wife sitting in the dark. I was going to ride straight to whatever loud, obnoxious lounge he was hiding in. I pictured the exact moment, I would walk right up to his table, drop those heavy papers right in front of him, and end this agonizing torture tonight. The heavy bass of the West Loop Lounge vibrated through the soles of my heels as I stepped out of the chilled night air and into the suffocating heat of the club. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, spilled liquor, and raw desperation. Neon lights cut through the synthetic fog, casting jagged, purple shadows over the bodies writhing on the dance floor. I gripped the strap of my leather handbag, the heavy divorce papers inside pressing against my hip like a loaded weapon. I kept strictly to the edges of the room, letting the darkness swallow my silhouette as my eyes scanned the VIP booths lining the far wall. I was hunting. I fully expected to find my husband tangled up with some 20-something girl with perfect hair and zero baggage. The anger boiling in my veins pushed me forward, making me practically invisible to the hulking bouncers and the drunken patrons stumbling past. I wanted to catch him red-handed. I wanted to see the guilt wash over his face when I slammed 18 pages of legal termination onto his table. Then, I saw him. Marcus was sitting in a deeply recessed velvet booth, tucked away in the most exclusive, secluded corner of the lounge. He was not draped over a woman. He was leaning forward over a low glass table, his posture rigid and commanding. Surrounding him were his closest friend, Elias, and 3 intensely serious men dressed in immaculate black suits. There were no smiles. There were no clinking glasses of overpriced champagne. The atmosphere around their table was so dense and severe it felt like a subterranean war room. I moved silently, slipping behind a slatted wooden partition that separated their private booth from a dimly lit hallway leading to the restrooms. I pressed my back against the cold wood, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the vulgar, boasting boy talk I was absolutely certain was about to spill from his lips. I waited to hear him complain about his depressed, ruined wife. Instead, the harsh, ice-cold timbre of Marcus's voice sliced through the ambient noise of the club, and the words that hit my ears made the blood freeze in my veins. Julian Vance thinks he can destroy Sadie and walk away. He is dead wrong. My breath caught instantly in my throat. My hands went entirely numb. I pressed my ear closer to the narrow gap in the wood, terrified that my own heartbeat would give me away. "We are executing the final phase," Marcus continued, his tone devoid of any empathy, sounding more like a ruthless corporate mercenary than the man I married. "I do not care what the financial penalty is. I have already liquidated the entire vintage car collection. Every single vehicle was sold to an overseas buyer. I took out a second mortgage on the lake house. The funds are fully cleared, washed, and ready for deployment." I slapped my hand over my mouth to stifle a sharp gasp. His cars, Marcus loved those classic cars more than he loved his own life. He had spent 10 grueling years restoring them piece by piece, and the lake house. That was supposed to be our secure retirement sanctuary, our safety net. One of the men in the black suit spoke up, his voice gravelly and extremely cautious. "The capital is firmly in place, Mr. Spencer. We have successfully bribed the compliance officers inside Vance's firm using the offshore accounts. We have acquired the internal documents proving his tax evasion and the falsified investor reports, but driving his stock price into the ground requires massive, coordinated short selling. If the federal market regulators catch wind of this aggressive manipulation, we are looking at severe federal charges. Are you absolutely certain about taking this risk?" "Burn his empire to the ground," Marcus replied without a single second of hesitation. "I want Vance bleeding out by the opening bell on Monday morning. I want him ruined, publicly, financially, and permanently." Elias leaned forward, his voice tight with panic and sheer desperation. "Marcus, please listen to yourself. You are risking decades in a federal penitentiary. If Julian finds out you are the one pulling the strings behind this massive attack, he will sue you into absolute bankruptcy, or he will hire someone to have you killed. And for what? Your wife hates you right now. You have not spoken a gentle word to her in 24 months. You are entirely destroying your own life for a woman who is ready to leave you." The silence that followed Elias's plea was absolutely deafening. The heavy, thumping bass of the club music seemed to fade into a distant, irrelevant hum as I waited, completely paralyzed, for my husband to respond. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice cracked, completely shedding the terrifying, icy armor he had worn for the past 2 years. "She has to hate me, Elias." The raw, bleeding agony embedded in those 5 words sent a physical shockwave violently through my chest. "She has to think I am a selfish bastard who abandoned her," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "Do you think I want to ignore her? Do you think it does not physically kill me to hear her crying in the dark and force myself to walk right past her bedroom door? If I fail, if the federal agents come knocking, or if Julian retaliates, she needs a legally documented history of our separation. She needs absolute proof that I alienated her, so the law and Julian's vicious lawyers cannot touch her. I cannot let her go down with me." I slid slowly down the rough wooden partition, my trembling knees finally buckling beneath the crushing weight of his revelation. "Everything I am doing," Marcus said, his voice hardening once more into an unbreakable, blood-sworn vow, "is to buy back her honor. I will take the financial ruin. I will gladly take the prison time. But Julian Vance is going to pay with his life's work for what he did to my wife." I sat on the sticky floor of the dark, narrow hallway, clutching my designer handbag tightly to my chest. Inside were 18 pages of strictly formatted legal documents accusing this man of irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. I had walked into this loud, obnoxious club, ready to divorce a coward. I was now sitting alone in the shadows, realizing I was married to a man who was quietly orchestrating the most massive, blood-chilling sacrifice I had ever witnessed, just to protect me from the crossfire of his own devastating war. I slipped out of the West Loop Lounge as silently as a ghost. The frigid Chicago wind whipped against my face, but I barely felt the cold. The 18 pages of divorce documents inside my leather bag now felt like a block of molten iron, searing through the fabric and burning against my hip. I did not storm back into the club, I did not scream, and I certainly did not confront him that night. Instead, I hailed a cab, returned to our dark penthouse, and crawled into the empty bed. I lay awake for 6 straight hours, staring at the ceiling, letting the shock slowly curdle into a lethal, calculated focus. The next morning, the moment Marcus left the apartment for his supposed consulting office, I went to work, for the first time in 2 years. The crushing fog of depression was completely gone. In its place was the razor-sharp intellect of the senior systems architect who had built Cobalt Horizon Tech. If Marcus thought he could run a shadow war without leaving a digital footprint, he fundamentally underestimated the woman he married. I booted up my personal terminal and began tearing through our home network router logs. It took me exactly 4 hours and 25 minutes to bypass the firewall he had clumsily installed on his private laptop. Marcus was a brilliant strategist, but he was not a coder. I traced a massive, consistent stream of encrypted data flowing from his device to an external Internet Protocol address. The location was not an offshore server. It was a physical address located less than 10 miles away, right in the heart of the city's industrial district. It was the climate-controlled warehouse facility where we stored our excess furniture. I drove there immediately. The facility manager knew me and waved me right through the front gate. When I reached our designated unit on the 3rd floor, I found a heavy steel-reinforced door secured by a biometric keypad. It was an impressive security measure for someone storing old sofas, but it was a child's toy for me. I unscrewed the faceplate, bypassed the biometric scanner by short-circuiting the relay, and pushed the heavy door open. The blast of freezing, air-conditioned air hit me first. The room was not a storage unit. It was a fully functional, high-grade server farm. Stacks of black server blades hummed in the dim light, connected by a chaotic web of blue and yellow Ethernet cables. In the center of the room sat a metal desk buried under mountains of printed financial ledgers. I stepped forward and picked up the top file. My eyes scanned the documents, and my breath hitched. Marcus had successfully acquired Julian Vance's deepest, most guarded secrets. Here were the raw transaction logs proving Julian had routed over $45 million of stolen investor funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. There were emails, forged audit reports, and wire transfer receipts. The data was undeniable. It was the exact ammunition needed to secure a federal indictment and lock Julian in a concrete cell for the rest of his miserable life. Standing alone in that freezing room, an overwhelming wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Half of me was entirely consumed by a profound, agonizing love for my husband. He had secretly sacrificed his entire world, trading his passions, his wealth, and his safety, all to provide me with the means to seek my justice. Yet, the other half of me was fiercely angry. How could he? How could he look at me and see a fragile, delicate bird that needed to be shielded from hardship? We built our lives together. We were supposed to be partners, by keeping me in the dark. He deprived me of my agency and left me to endure 2 years of deep loneliness. He chose to be a silent martyr instead of treating me like an equal partner in this struggle. I did not shut down the servers. I copied the master encryption keys to my secure flash drive and locked the unit exactly as I found it. I needed the final piece of the puzzle. On Wednesday afternoon, I tracked Elias down to a quiet, upscale coffee shop near Millennium Park. I slid into the booth directly across from him, ignoring the immediate panic that flashed across his face. "Hello, Elias," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You are going to tell me exactly when and where Marcus plans to drop the hammer on Julian Vance, and you are going to do it right now, without warning my husband, or I will remotely wipe every single server in that industrial warehouse and lock you both out of the network permanently." Elias dropped his coffee cup. It clattered loudly against the saucer. He stared at me, his face draining of all color. He tried to bluff, stammering about having no idea what I was talking about, but I simply leaned forward and recited the exact account numbers of Julian's offshore funds. Elias swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. "He is going to do it this Saturday," Elias whispered, glancing nervously around the cafe. "Saturday night, at 8 o'clock, Julian is hosting his annual charity gala at the Drake Hotel. Hundreds of high society guests, massive media coverage, and city officials will be there." "What is the execution method?" I demanded. "Marcus bought the blueprint of the hotel's internal network," Elias explained, his voice trembling. "During Julian's keynote speech, Marcus plans to use a localized backdoor exploit to hijack the audiovisual feed in the grand ballroom. He is going to project the financial ledgers and the wire fraud evidence directly onto the massive screens behind the stage. It will be a public execution." I calculated the variables instantly. "The Drake Hotel recently upgraded their cybersecurity infrastructure," I stated coldly. "They run active internal monitoring. If Marcus initiates a brute force data transfer from a device located inside that ballroom, the hotel's security team will isolate the source within 3 minutes. They will lock the room down. He will be caught red-handed before the police even arrive." Elias nodded miserably. I told him it was a suicide mission. I told him the risk of getting caught was 99%, but he refused to listen. He said the public humiliation is the only way to ensure Julian cannot buy his way out of the investigation. A sharp, freezing smile slowly spread across my face. Marcus was brilliant at gathering intelligence, but his execution strategy was reckless and tragically flawed. He was marching straight into a slaughterhouse, fully prepared to let the steel doors lock behind him. "Do not say a single word to him about this conversation," I instructed Elias, grabbing my purse and sliding out of the booth. "Let him proceed exactly as planned." I walked out into the busy Chicago street, the afternoon sun warming my skin for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I was not going to let my husband become a tragic hero. I was not going to let him die on this hill alone. He wanted a war, and he had successfully brought the enemy out into the open. Now, it was my turn to step onto the battlefield. I was going to rewrite the rules of his little game, and I was going to intervene in my own spectacular way. I stood before the full-length mirror in our master bedroom, adjusting the delicate diamond clasp of my necklace. I had chosen a floor-length, backless gown in a shade of deep, striking emerald green. It was not just a dress. It was perfectly tailored armor. For 24 months, I had hidden in oversized sweaters and sweatpants, hiding from the world and drowning in my own misery. Tonight, I was stepping onto the battlefield of the ultra-wealthy, and I intended to look absolutely lethal. When I walked into the living room, Marcus froze. He was already dressed in a sharp, tailored black tuxedo, but his face was completely drained of color. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. "What are you doing, Sadie?" he asked, his voice tight and strained. "I am going with you," I replied smoothly, picking up my clutch. "Julian Vance is hosting the charity gala of the decade. We are still legally married, and I am going as your +1. "Absolutely not," Marcus snapped, stepping in front of the door. Panic flared wildly in his eyes. "You cannot come tonight. You hate these high society events, and you despise Julian. Being in the same room as him will destroy your mental health. Please, just stay home." "My mental health has never been better," I said, stepping right past him and opening the door myself. "And if you do not escort me down to the car right now, I will take my own cab and make a grand entrance by myself. The choice is yours, darling." He had no choice. The entire ride to the magnificent Drake Hotel was suffocatingly silent. Marcus kept his jaw clenched, staring out the dark window. Every 2 minutes, his eyes would dart down to the heavy silver watch on his left wrist. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The automated script he had programmed was set to execute at exactly 8 o'clock. He was sweating, terrified that I was about to be caught in the inevitable fallout of his desperate gamble. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a sickening display of absolute opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the gold leaf ceilings, casting a warm, glittering light over hundreds of Chicago's most elite socialites, politicians, and corporate predators. Waiters in white ties glided silently across the marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted truffles, and the toxic arrogance of people who believed they were untouchable. Marcus guided me to a high-top table near the center of the room, his hand resting rigidly on the small of my back. He was a tightly coiled spring, constantly scanning the room, searching for the security cameras and the hotel guards. It was 7:45. He had 15 minutes left before his localized network attack was supposed to hijack the massive projection screens hanging behind the main stage. "Drink your champagne, Marcus," I murmured, taking a slow sip from my own glass. "You look like you are about to have a heart attack." Before he could answer, the crowd parted, and the devil himself walked right up to our table. Julian Vance wore a bespoke Italian suit that probably cost more than most people earned in an entire year. His silver hair was perfectly swept back, and his smile was a flawless, terrifying mask of predatory charm. He held a glass of champagne in one hand and adjusted his silk pocket square with the other. "Well, well," Julian purred, his dark eyes sweeping over me with blatant amusement. "Marcus, I must admit, I am genuinely shocked you brought her. And Sadie, how incredibly brave of you to show your face in this room." Marcus immediately stepped forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "Walk away, Julian. We are not here to entertain you." Julian ignored my husband completely, stepping closer to me. The fake sympathy dripping from his voice was absolutely nauseating. "I heard you are doing some low-level freelance technical support these days. Sadie, such a tragic, pathetic waste of your potential. You know, if you had just learned your place 2 years ago, you might still have a respectable career. But I suppose some people are just destined to fail." Marcus lunged forward, pure, unadulterated violence flashing in his eyes. He was ready to throw his entire plan away just to break Julian's jaw right there in the middle of the ballroom. I reached out and placed my hand firmly against Marcus's chest, stopping him instantly. I did not break eye contact with Julian. Instead of shrinking away, instead of letting my voice tremble, I offered Julian Vance the most radiant, venomous smile I had ever produced in my entire life. "Oh, Julian," I said, my voice ringing out clearly over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the background. You really do not need to worry about my career. Actually, I have been expanding my horizons lately. I have taken a very keen interest in offshore maritime law. Specifically, the regulatory loopholes surrounding the banking sectors in the Cayman Islands. Julian's smug smile froze instantly. A microscopic twitch disturbed the corner of his left eye. Yes, I continued, taking another elegant sip of my champagne. It is absolutely fascinating how much money can just disappear into the sunny weather down there. For instance, I was reading a case study just this morning about a little shell company called Azure Holdings. It is amazing how a company with 0 physical employees managed to process over $45 million in restricted investor funds during the fourth quarter alone. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute. Marcus stopped breathing, staring at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. Julian's face turned a sickening shade of ash gray. The arrogant, untouchable king of Chicago tech suddenly looked like a cornered rat. He realized, with terrifying clarity, that I knew his deepest, darkest secrets, the exact names, the exact dollar amounts. Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, finally locking onto his head of private security standing near the exit. He raised his hand, preparing to order his men to seize Marcus, clearly assuming my husband had leaked the information to me. Before he could snap his fingers, I stepped directly into his personal space. I leaned in, my lips hovering just an inch from his ear, and my voice dropped to a freezing, razor-sharp whisper. Are you looking for security? Julian, do not bother. You think my husband built this trap? You think Marcus is the one holding the gun to your head right now? I let out a soft, mocking laugh. No, Julian, it was me, and that massive data drop containing every single piece of evidence regarding your tax evasion and wire fraud, it did not trigger on these projection screens. It was sent straight to the cyber division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 5 minutes ago. Julian staggered backward, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide with sheer terror. And the best part, I whispered, my eyes locking onto his panicked gaze. I did not send it from my husband's servers. I hacked into your home network and routed the entire encrypted package through your personal computer's IP address. According to the federal government, you just suffered a guilty conscience and turned your own self in. Marcus stood entirely paralyzed, staring at me in absolute shock. In that single, breathless moment, all the puzzle pieces clicked together in his brilliant mind. He finally understood why I had been so calm. He realized that I had breached his heavily guarded warehouse, bypassed his biometric locks, and completely rewritten his source code. I had disarmed his suicidal bomb to protect him from decades in a federal prison, and I had personally pulled the trigger to execute my own abuser. I looked at the heavy silver watch on Marcus's wrist. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The elegant string quartet stopped playing abruptly, their bows freezing mid-air. The gentle murmur of the high society crowd turned into a chorus of startled gasps. A dozen armed men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed across their backs swarmed into the opulent room. They moved with terrifying precision, cutting straight through the crowd of billionaires and politicians. Julian tried to turn and run, but his legs completely gave out. 2 federal agents grabbed his arms, slamming him face first onto one of the tables draped in white linen. Crystal champagne flutes shattered onto the marble floor, the expensive liquor pooling around Julian's designer shoes as the cold steel of handcuffs locked violently around his wrists. Hundreds of horrified, elite eyes watched in dead silence as the mighty Julian Vance, the ruthless tyrant who had ruined my life, was dragged out of his own gala like a common street criminal. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers waiting outside illuminated the massive glass windows of the ballroom. I turned slowly to face my husband. Marcus was staring at me, not as a fragile woman who needed to be kept in the dark, but as the absolute equal he should have trusted from the very beginning. The grand, bloodless revenge was perfectly complete. The ride back to our penthouse was completely devoid of any celebration. We had just orchestrated the spectacular downfall of a billionaire tyrant. Yet the atmosphere inside the back of the town car was pulled so tight it felt like a wire about to snap. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, but the adrenaline crashing through my veins left behind a raw, agonizing ache. When the heavy wooden door of our apartment finally clicked shut behind us, the dead silence of the hallway crashed down on us like an avalanche. Marcus took a ragged breath and immediately closed the distance between us. His eyes were wide, desperate, and filled with a frantic mixture of profound relief and awe. He reached out, wrapping his strong arms around me, burying his face into my shoulder as if trying to anchor himself after a massive hurricane. But I did not melt into his embrace. Every muscle in my body went completely rigid. I pushed my hands violently against his chest and stepped backward, putting a wide gap of cold hardwood floor between us. I marched over to my leather handbag, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I reached inside, grabbed the thick, 18-page stack of legal documents, and hurled them across the kitchen island. They hit the marble counter with a sharp, heavy slap, fanning out under the harsh pendant lights. "Do you think you are a hero?" I screamed, the sound tearing violently through the suffocating quiet of the apartment. Hot, stinging tears finally spilled over my eyelashes, blurring my vision. "Do you think sacrificing yourself makes you some kind of savior? Marcus, you stripped me of my right to fight my own battles. You robbed me of my agency and left me to burn in absolute hell for 2 entire years." He stared at the divorce papers scattered on the counter, his jaw trembling. "Sadie," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I needed my partner," I yelled, the bottled agony of 24 months finally exploding out of my chest. "When Julian destroyed my career, I needed you to hold my hand and tell me we would rebuild. Instead, you locked me out. You turned yourself into a ghost. I spent endless nights crying on the bathroom floor, convinced you hated me, convinced I was a pathetic failure who repulsed her own husband. You let me believe my marriage was dead just so you could play the solitary knight in the dark." The icy, impenetrable, defensive wall Marcus had spent 2 years building finally shattered into a million pieces. His broad shoulders caved inward. He dropped heavily to his knees, right there on the kitchen floor, burying his face in his hands. A harsh, agonizing sob ripped from his throat. The proud, calculating man who had just manipulated a ruthless corporate predator into federal custody was completely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified husband. "I was so completely helpless," he cried, his voice entirely raw and shattered. "You do not understand what it did to me. Sadie, when Julian ruined you, when I saw you lying in bed, staring at the wall with your spirit completely crushed, I felt an absolute, agonizing failure as a man. I was supposed to protect you from the world, and I failed you." He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and overflowing with tears. My thirst for revenge turned into a vile, consuming monster. I wanted to tear him apart piece by piece. I did not tell you because I was terrified you would see exactly how ruthless I had become. I was doing illegal, despicable things. I was completely destroying our finances, bribing corporate officers, and risking decades in a federal prison. I was terrified that if I let you into my war, the darkness inside me would taint you. I wanted you to remain pure, even if it meant you had to hate me. I thought if I could just hand you his absolute ruin on a silver platter, my sins against you would be forgiven. I stood there, trembling, as the naked, brutal truth laid itself bare between us. We were 2 completely broken people who loved each other so fiercely, so dangerously, that we were willing to completely annihilate ourselves just to save the other. But in our desperate attempts to protect each other, we had weaponized our silence. We had used deception as a shield, and it had nearly bled both of us dry. I looked down at the incredibly proud man kneeling on the floor, his tears dropping onto the expensive wood. Slowly, I walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up the thick stack of divorce papers. The silence in the room stretched out, agonizing, and suffocatingly long. I stared at the blank signature line at the bottom of the final page. I thought about the 12 years we had shared. I thought about his cars, our lake house, and the terrifying depths of his blind devotion. My hands gripped the edges of the thick paper. Instead of reaching for a pen, I twisted my wrists and tore the entire stack completely in half. The sound of the ripping paper echoed loudly in the quiet room. I let the torn pieces flutter to the floor. Falling right beside his knees, I sank down, wrapping my arms around his shaking shoulders, resting my forehead directly against his. "You killed that monster tonight," I told him, my voice completely hoarse and exhausted. "But you almost killed our marriage in the process. I do not need a hidden bodyguard. Marcus, I never did. I just need a husband." 6 months later, the sensational headlines about Julian Vance being sentenced to federal prison had entirely faded from the front pages. My professional reputation in the tech world was completely restored, absolutely cleared of any fabricated wrongdoing. I received dozens of highly lucrative job offers from elite firms across the country, but I politely declined every single one of them. I had absolutely zero desire to ever return to the toxic, glittering world of high society. Instead, Marcus and I committed ourselves to the most grueling, emotionally exhausting marriage therapy available, twice a week. We sat in a small, quiet room and systematically tore down our deeply ingrained habits of fighting our battles completely alone. It was terrifyingly hard work. We had to learn how to communicate all over again. We started sharing our smallest, most irrational fears instead of burying them behind impenetrable masks of stoic strength. Marcus completely changed his entire life as well. He sold his massive corporate consulting firm to his junior partners. With the remaining capital, he opened a tiny, fully transparent legal and tech advisory office. His new, dedicated mission was to provide affordable, aggressive support to small startups being bullied and cornered by massive corporate predators. There were no hidden servers anymore. There were no encrypted shadow accounts. Everything he did was entirely out in the open. The most profound change, however, was our home. We officially sold the freezing, echoing penthouse in the Gold Coast. It carried too many agonizing memories of our dead silence, feeling far too much like a beautifully decorated tomb. Instead, we bought an old, weather-beaten house out in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Oak Park. It was a massive fixer-upper that needed entirely new plumbing, fresh wiring, and a whole lot of love. We decided to do the hard labor ourselves. We spent our weekends wearing paint-splattered overalls, sanding down rough hardwood floors, and replacing cracked roof shingles under the hot sun. Every single time we plastered over a broken crack in the drywall. We made sure to have a genuine, brutally honest conversation. We rebuilt the foundation of our marriage board by board, truth by truth. This evening, as the golden sun began to set, we sat together on the dusty wooden steps of our front porch. We were sharing a single bottle of cheap domestic beer, passing it back and forth. Marcus reached over and grabbed my hand, tightly interlocking his fingers with mine. Both of our hands were completely covered in wet mud, sawdust, and white primer paint. Looking at our dirty, intertwined hands, I finally understood the profound truth. Revenge can offer a fleeting, explosive moment of satisfaction, but vengeance cannot keep you warm at night. The only thing that can truly make a marriage last for an eternity is absolute honesty and the unwavering willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder with your partner. Whether you are walking through blinding glory or terrifying darkness, there are no more secrets between us. There are no more silent, bleeding sacrifices. There is only absolute, unshakable partnership. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, our channel has been entirely demonetized, so if you enjoyed today's journey, please consider helping us with just a $1 donation. You can simply scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity directly allows us to pay our dedicated team, helping them feed their families and empowering them to continue creating more amazing Zoe revenge stories for you. Thank you. And please take care of each other.